I could only stare at Delta in shock as I took in what he said. "What?" I said, as I finally managed to use my voice. "What do you mean that's your mother?" Delta gave me a "what do you think" look. I glared at him. The possibility of the woman in the tube being his mother was completely absurd. Delta made a disarray of the various tools on the lined-up tables. "What are you doing?" I asked, after I observed him for a few extra seconds. The Guardian ignored me and continued on with whatever he was doing, occasionally knocking over some tools. Feeling annoyed, I placed a hand on his shoulder and turned him around roughly. "Just what in the hell do you think you're doing?" I asked harshly. The Guardian glared at me.
I have to free my mother. She's still alive.
He went back to making a complete mess of the area. "How do you intend to free her?" I inquired.
There's a hatch on the front of the tube, but the power's out, so I'll have to break it open.
Delta crouched on the floor and picked up a thick hammer. I raised an eyebrow. "You expect a hammer will get your mother out?" Delta simply looked at me with a serious expression. I felt my eyebrow twitch in annoyance. I couldn't help but feel suspicious. It seemed too much to be a coincidence that Delta's lost mother was kept in this specific enemy lab. If the rumors about the experiments were true, then the woman inside the tube could have been a clone of Delta's mother. "Delta, you need to put that down," I said, as I pointed to the hammer. The Guardian did not pay attention to me. Instead, he positioned himself in front of the tube and raised his arms up. Without a second thought, I tackled him to the cold ground and pinned him down with my knees. He looked at me with those eyes, narrowed in frustration.
Get off me, Agent Moore!
He hissed through clenched teeth. I glared at him. "And let you do a stupid mistake that could put our lives at risk? I don't think so." Delta started to struggle. His movements became more violent and aggressive. One of his legs managed to free itself to kick me in the gut. I let out a grunt, but I kept my firm hold on him. Eventually, Delta realized that I would not budge from our questionable position. It only occurred to me that at the moment, just how close we were. The tips of our noses were nearly touching, and I straddled him in a rather provocative way. I forced myself to ignore the rather provocative physical contact and maintain a collective attitude. I stared down at the Guardian as I made an effort to breathe normally. After what seemed like an eternity, I spoke. "Put that hammer down. I won't allow you to put our lives and our mission in jeopardy." The Guardian looked at me with desperation evident in his gray eyes.
I need to know whether that woman is my mother or not. I spent the last 7 years believing she was dead.
His eyes visibly molted into a lighter shade.
Please, Rachel,
he whispered tenderly. My eyes widened in surprise, as my heart momentarily fluttered. Over the past few months, my relationship with Delta had dramatically changed. We had come a long way from me being annoyed by his very presence to what we became, though I had no bloody idea what changed. We already established that we were friends back on the plane, yet for some reason I felt that wasn't right. It was like I wanted more, but wasn't sure if that would have been appropriate. I barely knew anything about the Guardian, but that only seemed to draw me in. As I looked down at Delta's saddened face, I saw the eyes of a man who was desperate to hold on to the one thing that made him whole in an otherwise empty world. My eyes softened. It was a huge risk to let him carry out his wish, but I knew that I already cared about him too much to see him suffer like that. I carefully got off of him and awkwardly stretched my upper body. Delta immediately got up and wiped off some imaginary dust from his cloaks. A stiff silence took over as we both momentarily tried to avoid looking at one another. Luckily, Delta grew some balls and spoke out first.
Thank you, Agent Moore.
I turned my head towards him and was met with the intense gaze of the Guardian. I felt heat creep up my neck and face, so I nodded and quickly looked away to avoid any further embarrassment. Delta's footsteps echoed in the empty hallway. The noise was amplified by the stillness of the atmosphere. I shivered slightly at the spooky effect, but pushed the feeling away. I activated my earpiece. "Fear, are you there?"
"Yeah, what's the situation?"
he replied. "I want you to scout out for any entryways that may have been overlooked."
"And what accomplishments do you have in mind by me doing that?"
he asked dryly. I had to fight the urge to roll my eyes at the assassin's attitude. "Because, Agent Fear, we are in a location where we have no idea what to expect. I don't want to be caught by surprise if we end up being ambushed." I answered as if explaining something obvious to a child. There was a brief silence.
"Of course. I'll get on it right away,"
he answered stiffly. "Contact Gizmo for an infrared scan of the building. Also, tell him to scan for any activity around the neighboring areas. Get Elvira, Olsen, and Predator to help you as well."
"Yes, ma'am,"
he said, and the line was cut. I sighed quietly before I turned my attention back to Delta. The Guardian had managed to create a large crack on the hard glass, but nothing of significant damage. Irritated, he dropped the useless hammer to the ground and kicked the glass. I stared in shock at his continually careless behavior. I mentally debated on whether or not I should have scolded his actions, but knew that it would have been useless as he had proved earlier. After a few kicks, he delivered a powerful blow that shattered the glass. Bits of them flew out, and the liquid poured down. I covered my head and face with my arms as some of the pieces had hit me. When the glass shards all fell to the ground, I looked up. The lack of material caused the woman to tilt forward as her barely clothed torso stuck out. Instantly, Delta caught the woman before she could fall any further. He grabbed her by the waist and lifted the rest of her body from the tube before he set her down to the ground. She was still out cold. Her body completely relied on Delta for balance. Gently, he set the woman in a sitting position. He placed some of her hair strands behind her ear and studied every detail of her face, as if he were confirming his belief. He let out a small sigh and turned his attention towards me. I stared back at him as I waited for his move. Delta got up and walked over until he was in front of me. I leaned my head back to stare directly at his face. The way he was looking at me, with those intense eyes of his, made a pleasurable heat flow within me. For a moment, I was tempted to press my lips against his and see how soft they would be. I blinked, though the action was considerably lazy compared to my rapid beating heart. I actually liked him. I continued to look at Delta with a growing uncertainty. I've already admitted to myself on how I felt, but what was the chance in him feeling the same way for me? He was my guardian after all. For all I knew, his concern could have only been because of my director's orders. My heart deflated at the possibility.
Thank you again, Agent Moore.
Came the rich voice of the Guardian. I smiled slightly. Don't worry about it. I'm sorry that I was harsh at first. I stopped and hesitated, but continued on. I'm glad that I could help, I said, as I looked at him tenderly. Something unfamiliar lit up in his eyes. He looked like he was about to say something, but was interrupted when the line went live.
"Hey boss, we've got some strange activities going on here,"
Predator stated. I pushed aside all of my rushing emotions and focused on the situation. What is it?
Gizmo detected a signal that was set out just a few minutes ago. The room I'm in seems warmer than the rest. This is strange for a supposedly abandoned place.
Don't go in alone, I said. Take Agent Elvira with you, and make sure that you two keep an eye out for anything suspicious. It seems like we may not be alone in here.
Roger that. Predator out.
I dropped my hand to my side and glanced at Delta, who was staring at me with intense eyes. A frown plastered itself on my face. The Guardian nodded in understanding and stepped closer to me. To my surprise, I didn't feel weak admitting to myself that I felt safe in his presence. A few minutes later, Predator's voice came back on the line.
So far, nothing seems out of the ordinary. Elvira used an infrared scanner and didn't pick anything up. I think we should... Hold on a sec.
My heart skipped a beat as I anticipated Predator's answer. He came back on a moment later.
Scanner's picking up a hotspot. We're going in to investigate.
Do you want me to send in Fear or Olsen for backup? I asked.
No, I think Elvira and I can handle this. I'll contact you when we get there.
The line was cut, and I was left there anxiously waiting for his update. In the meantime, Delta was checking on his mom once more. I nearly jumped when the comm line was activated again.
Boss, Elvira and I arrived at the hotspot. There's definitely a heat trace here, yet whoever was here is gone. We're going to...
A crash-like noise interrupted him as the sound of struggling followed suit. I panicked. Predator! What's going on? My slight hysteria caught Delta's attention, for he swiftly turned his head towards mine and gave me a concerned look. Predator! Answer me! I exclaimed.
We're not alone, boss!
He yelled.
Elvira went after the guy!
Gizmo then cut into the line.
We've got to get out of here, Agent Moore. The signal is actually broadcasting this location.
He stated. My eyes widened as I took in the news. Predator, try to help out Elvira.
Yes, ma'am!
Predator replied before he cut off the line. Gizmo, run a scan of the area and be on standby, as we'll be up soon, I ordered.
Roger.
He replied. I then whipped my head to face Delta. Get her ready. We're leaving, I ordered. Without any question, Delta immediately did as I instructed. I took out my signature gun, just in case, as I waited for Delta to be ready. Gizmo then accessed the comm line.
We've got company,
He stated, just as the assassin came in with eyes hard and serious.